This has been one of the most difficult reviews for me to write. Initially, I was just going to make my review as a comparison to the Analog Pocket. But honestly, I don't think it's fair to compare these two. That's like saying it's Rocky versus Ivan Drago, but instead of Stallone playing Rocky, he's actually Rambo in the ring with all of his weapons. However, I do think the ModRetro Chromatic still has its place. Sort of. Let me explain. I try to stay away from other people's reviews when I'm currently reviewing a new product, but I did watch the Retro Dodo's podcast interview with Palmer Luckey, the guy who made the Chromatic, and it really changed my perspective on the device. I actually posted my first impressions and unboxing of the Chromatic earlier this week on the second channel, Jake64, if you want to see how my thoughts have changed from then to now in this review. But let's start by talking about what ModRetro's Chromatic does. It plays Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. That's it. So this is just a $200 Game Boy Color. And that's about it for me. So like, subscribe, and I will see. I'm just kidding. But if you're expecting anything more than that, I'm sorry to disappoint. But it is an FPGA-based handheld that emulates the Game Boy Color hardware. It has everything it needs to be a fully fledged GBC, like a link port, cart slot, even the IR stuff is here. It may look like a DMG or even a Game Boy Pocket, but this is pretty much bar for bar a Game Boy Color. It's as tall as it, it's as wide as it, and it's just as thick. But the Chromatic has a little more volume overall. It even has the exact screen size and pixel count as the original GBC, just with the backlight this time. Heck, it even uses custom tri-wing screws. Why? ModRetro didn't really do much else to separate this from the original Game Boy Color. It's got more modern features like a better, louder speaker, but it's still just one speaker, and now it's downfiring instead of coming at you. I really wish there were two front-facing speakers for true stereo sound, but at least it sounds decent. It still has a headphone jack if you're into that, and it has two symmetrical spots for lanyards and charms. The buttons are a nice PBT plastic with some snappy membranes. I am very thankful that the start and select buttons are not all membrane like most of the Game Boy models, and it does retain the battery compartment, but it oddly holds 3 AA batteries this time, and they even include 3 to get you started. You can also update your device and do video out through the USB-C port, but the video out is genuinely lame. As of right now, you can only plug it into your PC and have the video output to a streaming software. No docking it to a TV, no controller support, just for streaming. And it only outputs a 160 by 144 resolution, so it does not look good on stream. I really hope they change this in an update since they have an ESP32 in there for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Plus, I would love to use this with one of my many USB-C dongles. This could be the GBC Super Game Boy that we never got. Alright, now we can finally talk about the menu button and the very few options you actually have. You can adjust the brightness, mute the device completely, turn on frame blending for the 3 games that need it, and turn on color correction that only does anything when you're on your PC. Other than that, you have a pretty pointless controls page since the buttons are actually labeled on the device, fun fact, and a system page that tells you your firmware version and your player number. I'm not really sure what the player number is for. At least you can see your battery life in the menu, and there will be a notification in the top right when you only have about 30 minutes or less left. I would love to see some settings to adjust the color saturation because I love saturated colors and this is very muted. That's great if you like the muted colors, but there's no harm in giving us options. You can do a ton of different color palettes on boot for original Game Boy games, but only original Game Boy games, which makes sense. You don't really need to do it to full color games. Also, for the love of modding, can you please add a sleep mode? I know that it wasn't on the original GBC, but it's so nice in the modern era. But while I'm complaining, I want to get the nitpicks out of the way. The magnesium alloy shell does feel nice, but in the cold winter here in Oregon, it is ice cold when I go to pick it up every morning, and just cold in general most times I pick it up. And it makes me think that this is going to get pretty hot in the summertime if you play it outside in the sun, assuming you live in a warm climate. It's also much heavier than any other Game Boy, so don't expect to play this for too long when you're laying on your back. It's a solid Game Boy Color, but it's really just a new Game Boy Color. Going back to that Retro Dodo interview, Palmer says that he wanted this to be the ultimate Game Boy or the last Game Boy you'll ever buy. He even straight up says he likes his Analog Pocket. Palmer made this device not to make money, as he is a self-described billionaire from selling Oculus to Facebook, but he revived his company ModRetro because he wanted to make the Chromatic for himself. It's not supposed to compete with the Analog Pocket or any other handheld emulators, and he even claims that he's losing money on this project. Maybe he doesn't make that much or doesn't make any money at all on the console, but he's absolutely making money selling the games, which I would agree. The Chromatic does not compete with the Analog Pocket. The Analog Pocket can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance cartridges, as well as Game Gear, Neo Geo Pocket, Neo Geo Pocket Color, Atari Lynx, TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, and Super Graphics carts with adapters. Not to mention all of the other consoles you can play with other cores and digital game files off of a micro SD card. I don't even have to mention the gorgeous screen that has 10 times the amount of pixels, or sleep mode, for you to know that the Chromatic doesn't hold a candle to the Pocket. Even comparing it to Funny Playing's much cheaper FPGBC, they are pretty much the same device, but like I said, it's much cheaper. So the best comparison I have is to original hardware. You can customize a real Game Boy to your heart's content with most, if not all of the features and even more than the Chromatic offers. And you can do a lot of these mods for similar prices or even cheaper if you do it yourself. Heck, if all you want is a gorgeous backlit screen with a higher pixel count, I sell pre-modded Game Boys for less than the price of the Chromatic, RetroRemastered.com, and you'd be giving me money instead of another billionaire. But even if we push my conflict of interest out of the way, I just think the Analog Pocket is a way better value for your dollar. ModRetro does want the community to go wild with mods and stuff, which is awesome, but it shouldn't be up to the community to make the Chromatic worth its weight, which really makes me wonder why they removed the microSD card slot from the board if they want the community to make it their own. Why don't we have the ability to just play ROMs straight off a microSD card? That's not the only puzzling thing I found in my teardown that I posted to the second channel, Jake64. They made their own custom cart slot that has the voltage switch you need to play GBA games. So why was this not just a Game Boy Advance from the start? If Palmer Luckey really wanted to make this the last Game Boy you'll ever buy, it should have been one that could play all Game Boy games. I think the most interesting thing to come out of this release is the updated version of Game Boy Tetris. It comes with the Chromatic like it did with the DMG back in '89, which is cool, but I was a bit disappointed that not only does this not come with a box or manual, but you also can't buy this separately despite all the other new Game Boy games that ModRetro is now distributing. They should sell this game on its own because it's my new favorite way to play Tetris. It is awesome. What do you guys think? Is the ModRetro Chromatic the ultimate Game Boy? Don't get me wrong, I do think this is cool, but is it worth $200? Let me know in those comments down below. I have a lot of cool content set up for the next few months that you won't want to miss, so I highly recommend subscribing, especially if you want to see me review the new OLED screen mod for the Switch Lite next week. But for reals this time, that's about it for me. So like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Later, guys. I guess this is perfect for all those weirdos who want the screen to look like the original, but with a backlight.